Sure. Welcome to the beginning of our second month focus for this digital history series under Curdo. I'm Adam Carr. I'm Rob's colleague and friend, and we enjoyed doing our first month on the open housing marches so much that we saw openings to keep going of local stories of Milwaukee that folks don't discuss enough against the background of the pandemic and now the protests that are out in the street. We were planning to do Latinx history in Milwaukee and Wisconsin, and specifically with a focus on resistance and protest. And it turns out to be a really appropriate moment to be looking at those topics and remembering some of the stories that we so conveniently forget. Actually, I think there's a lot of convenience and how we've erased a lot of narratives from our shared story. So, Rob, do you want to give a little intro who you are and what we're doing?
Absolutely. Rob Smith. I'm an associate professor over at Marquette. I also direct the Center for Urban Research, Teaching and Outreach. This is really an opportunity for us to continue to engage with our local educators around important topics relative to Milwaukee's history. Obviously, today we're going to be talking about the Chapman Hall takeover. We've got two awesome guests with us. Alberto Maldonaldo, director of the Roberto Hernandez Center, a direct outcome of those protests. And then we have Kleppe-Montenegro, an activist and filmmaker here with us locally. And folks, we're going to have a great time talking about that rich moment in Milwaukee history, that rich moment in student activism that was here local, but also spread across the country for years and years, that then reshaped the way colleges and universities went about curricular options, as well as efforts to increase the number of diverse faculty, staff, and students on campus. So this moment is particularly impactful when we think about higher education, and then of course its connections to the civil rights movement, the Chicano movement. There are all kinds of local and national connections that are critical to this story. Alberto, say a little bit about yourself real quickly. Just want to give you folks a chance to say hello, and then Eric will ask you to do the same.
Sure. Well, first and foremost, thank you for not only inviting me, but for putting a little bit of a magnifying glass to this moment in history, particularly to Latino student activism and community engagement. I'm currently the director of the Roberto Hernandez Center. Been at the UWM campus for the last 22 years, working in areas of pre-college, academic advising, admissions, and also in the capacity of director at the center, and always been engaged in the advancement and outreach and providing access to students of color and particularly Latino students in our community. So I also co-lead the Chancellor's Committee for Hispanic Serving Initiatives on campus, and we're really trying to advance ideas and strategy that would hopefully can be replicated in all communities on campus. I serve under the direction of Dr. Joan Prince and the Global Inclusion Engagement area on campus, and it is with that in mind and through that lens that we collectively as multicultural centers are trying to elevate and provide the necessary access to students on our campus and in the community.
Yeah. We thank you, Alberto. As our teachers and educators know, the transitions and the pathways to higher education still require a lot of attention, and quite frankly, still require a lot of activism. Props to Dr. Prince, props to Joan Prince over there. I was obviously working with Joan a few years too, and you, Alberto, and it was a great time. Eric, what's going on, brother? How you doing?
Good. ¿Qué hubo, mi gente? Buenas tardes. Estamos aquí en el lado sur de Milwaukee. What's good, everybody? Great to be speaking with y'all today. I'm here in the south side of Milwaukee. Like was said, my name is Eric Kleppe-Montenegro. I am a transplant to Milwaukee from Louisville, Kentucky. I've been here about 6 years in the south side. been a organizer for a long time, a multimedia artist for a long time. But since I've come to Milwaukee, I've really, been given opportunities to go much deeper into both of those passions and practices. So I used to work at the Alberto Hernandez Center, which was, kind of how I got brought into the conversation, I believe. I was the program associate at the Alberto Hernandez Center at UWM. Also former film student of that program. I used to be an educator in the Menominee Valley Urban Ecology Center and a social worker for La Causa. The list goes on, but I'm just a community member with a camera and lots of different tools at my disposal to tell the stories of the people around me.
Eric, we appreciate you joining us, and we really appreciate the fact that you are mobile right now. And if at any point you need to share your screen and show us what's going on out in the streets, you feel free to do so.
For sure. And for content, I'm not like during a protest right now. I'm actually getting tested for Corona, just as a precautionary message. So we're sitting in line, and it looks like the line is very long right now.
Okay, well, we might need to see that unfold too.
I was going to say that's another very relevant narrative. I do want to point out one of the Rob, when I was at the protest last weekend, Rob and I were standing together. Then I had heard a drummer go by, and I was texting with Eric, and it turns out that was Eric with his snare drum in the march. So if you have been out in the streets at protests, if you hear a snare drum and now a drum line, that's our guy Eric right here.
That's what's up. Appreciate that.
Yeah. I'm in the process of trying to like squat up with a bunch of drummers in the city and people who want to drum in the city, and form a little organization to provide that kind of like provide the vibes, the beat behind the chants and everything. I think that's really important as an artist. I think that's one of the things I can contribute in this kind of moment. And I have a marching band background from my time in Louisville, Kentucky. So I kind of want to bring that to the street now. So
you're earning that scoliosis.
Oh gosh.
All right, folks. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna, as you all know, the attendees who've been with us before, we get you in the mix right away. We like to use materials that we encourage for the classroom, and so we're gonna talk about the Chapman Hall Takeover, and then we're gonna talk about teaching this particular moment in the classroom, and then we'll go into some audience Q&A more formally. But we want you all to be a part of the conversation immediately. So drop comments into the chat, offer us some Q&A. We've got Lisa and Keisha and Ben and some other folks working with us in Command Central, keeping us focused. Ellery is telling us we got some interested drummers. So good. All right.
Oh, that's what's up.
Yeah.
So yeah, we got together for history and came away with the drum line. That would be the best, the best outcome possible.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So we're gonna get you guys warmed up, Alberto and Eric, and so we're gonna start with some images. Is that right, Adam? We're gonna go to your images first.
So let's
go ahead, man.
Yeah, we're gonna jump into images. The way that we've been exploring the story of the open housing marches is this participatory image analysis, looking at what it looked like, not just talking about it. And so I'm going to take over the screen here right now. I have, I think, 34 photos that we are going to scroll through together here with Alberto and Eric leading us through them. Spoiler alert, one. But these images, I want to just share one thing, is that the Chapman Hall Takeover started on August 27th of 1970 with about 200 Latino activists on the campus of UW Milwaukee. The open housing marches, which is the story we're pivoting away from, started on August 28th of 1967, 3 years and a day prior, with about 200 young Black activists going from the north side to the south side. So not only is this a kind of a successor to that story, but it exists just kind of in direct chronological relationship to the open housing marches. The Chapman Hall Takeover certainly was just like right on the heels of the open housing marches, and I'm sure some of that energy spilled over into these and probably some conversations and tactics. So we're just gonna see Alberto and Eric, tell us what we're seeing here. This is kind of us walking into the chancellor's office. For our audience who may have never seen these images before, what is this scene who are these young people? Actually, a very young person. Got dudes smoking cigars.
It's yeah. I mean, I see a lot of the protagonists of this movement, and you know, I want to say that you know, the catalyst and the prelude of what we're seeing right now begins with you know, the recognition that UWM at the time was not doing enough to outreach in the community and to provide the necessary access to a community that had grown to up to about 30,000, you know, Latinos, particularly in the near south side and the River West area. I mean, this was a predominantly Mexican, Puerto Rican coalition that comes together, but it's led, you know, unlike, you know, other movements prior to this one in the African American community that were led by students, particularly at UWM, in the creation, eventually creation of, you know, African American studies and things like that. This movement was primarily led by community. You know, it was community, it was women, it was children, it was families, grandmothers. It was the faith-based community at the time. And so when we look at these pictures, we see a diverse group of individuals. And, you know, and when you look back at some of the commentary and some of the comments that you hear from folks at that time is like, you know, they had walked into a room that was probably bigger than their entire homes. You know, they haven't seen that much furniture in a space. And so, you know, coming into Chapman Hall after, you know, Dean Richard Davis in the School of Education, you know, had a great interest in advancing this agenda of not only helping the Latino community and providing access, but, you know, all folks of color in the city, right? This group faces, faces the chancellor at the time and that resistance, and is that resistance and Dean Davis' inability to house this movement in the School of Education is that, you know, folks then decide to mobilize and say, you know what, enough is enough, and you know, those words cannot be more relevant today, right? But at that time, you know, they decide to say, well, if we cannot, you know, house the Spanish-speaking outreach in the School of Education and continue to help advance the demands and agenda, then let's move into you know, taking over the chancellor's office and really take the demands, you know, front and center to the highest leader, you know, of the campus.
Yeah. Hey, Eric, as you look at these images, give us your artistic interpretation. You're an artist. You stumble across these.
Yes.
In an archive, you're doing some research. What comes to your mind? Give us some artistic commentary on this.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, I would like to say that my first interaction with these images was that they were up on the walls at the Roberto Hernandez Center. So I would go to work every day and see these images in the wall in my workplace. So personally, it was something that was always very captivating and inspiring. And I tried to make a point to make sure they were like hung properly and displayed well, to pay respect to the people who put in that work and to pay respect to the artists who took the photos. Speaking on the artistic perspective of it, I feel like a lot of photos, especially in a photojournalism style, feel very detached from the subjects. I would say the opposite about this. This feels very like united with the subjects. So I couldn't speak off the top of my head about the individual who took the photos, what their role was, but their practice was one that just put you right in the space directly. It wasn't like, you know, through a window or far away with a zoom. It was right there in the room with the people. And part of that aspect is kind of making yourself as a media worker also an accomplice in the act of the takeover, right? Yeah. So you can kind of feel like the sense of excitement and maybe even I would say a sense of danger that comes with participating in these type of radical actions where there is a potential for state violence in response, especially back then. So one thing that always stands out to me in particular is like the black and white. Obviously, that was a product of the medium. For me, that makes it kind of even more compelling in a way, and it kind of just makes it seem like the second it was taken, they were writing history through their action, but the photographer was also creating history through that documentation. And you feel the spirit and the energy of all the individuals involved. When I worked in the office and looked at these images every day, I would take time to break it down to our guests, especially when there would be like high school groups visiting the office. I would take time to get them to look at these photos, look at the people that they see in the photos, and you know, and realize the connection between those people, the center that we were standing in at the moment. And I think Alberto said it perfectly. That was like the main thing I would want to talk about. Just the fact that it wasn't students at the time. There was only like, my understanding, there was like 7 Latino students at UWM at the time of the action.
Yeah, about 12,
so it was,
yeah.
It was only a handful of Latino students at the time. So it wasn't like student activists. It was real community members. And there's also a documentary that was previously produced about this subject just over 10 years ago, I believe. And one of the main points that they brought up, as well as what Alberto said, was that it was families. So when the mothers came and when the children came, it took the action to a whole new level of really being like the whole family's here. The community stepped off of Holton Street and stepped out of the near South Side and entered the Hall of Power. And I feel like the photographer did an excellent job of capturing that vibe of the community in that hall.
Thanks, Eric. We're going to get back into some of the more formal questions because we want to keep in mind that we want to make our conversation very accessible in the classroom. And so let's look at some of these questions, and you gentlemen decide which ones you want to jump in on. Also, for folks who are attending, if you have some thoughts about these questions, please offer your commentary as well. One of the comments we got from Nate Rice was that we were seeing a broad representation of race and culture, and I think we can add the richness of identity into the texture of those images. But you know, what conditions led to the protests? What were these protests about? Alberto, you've covered some of this stuff. And
can I make a finer point on that? So this image here we see on the right, we have there's just something about the technology here that's very different than this moment that I think is important. You can see that woman in the corner there talking on a phone, and you actually see 2 guys holding up what could be smartphones, like they're live streaming, but those are radio guys. They're just making audio recordings. The technology was very different. And I've heard different accounts of how the mechanism of the takeover, like when they got into his office, I think they had to use the chancellor's very phone to make the calls to their friends. They couldn't just group text folks or, you know, get them on WhatsApp and be like, hey, everybody come down to the chancellor's office. Can you talk about kind of how the actual takeover took place?
Well, it is my recollection that, it was about a matter of opportunity. And in the words of Jesus Salas, you know, they were trying to wait for the perfect time that sort of the guard was let down, that led to them almost sneak in and actually lock the door. And they actually locked one of the administrators in the bathroom or one of the rooms adjacent to the chancellor's office, and that allowed for a large group of individuals to come in and really take over the space. Granted, there were more individuals outside and in the adjacent areas of the building, but you know, it was almost strategic and you know, in nature that they found the right moment, and given the conditions and the message that they wanted to convey, that this is their chance, their only chance to really take the message straight to the top administrator. And granted, Chancellor Klachi was not there the day they did that, but eventually he was able to get on the phone and talk to Jesus, and Jesus was able to convey, their demands, and then, it was a number of days, right, that led to a final decision. But from the recollections, also people slept in the lawn in front of Chapman Hall. So this is a multi-day sit-in that folks were very committed and almost taking turns in occupying these spaces, but not letting down until they got an answer and they were able to accomplish their goal.
Who are some of the key leaders? Why don't we get into some of those names?
Sure.
Alberto, you dropped a couple. Eric, you can feel free to drop a couple as well. I know that many of these folks' names still ring out here locally. Just give us a roll call, if you can, for some of the folks who were key and central to the Chapman Hall takeover.
So often, we see in some of these pictures, obviously the image of Roberto Hernandez, who was a member of the committee for the education of Latin Americans. CELA was the organized body that took these demands first to Dean Davis in the School of Education, and they were working with Dean Davis. And it's CELA who, in conjunction with other organizations in the community that sort of takes the lead. So Roberto Hernandez, Jesus Salas, Ernesto Chacon, a number of other individuals that sort of, take the lead in organizing the takeover itself, or the events that took place in Chapman Hall during those days. Of course, you had 5 individuals that were arrested in that process, and again, both like I said before, this is predominantly Puerto Ricans and Mexicans coming together, which is often, sometimes talked about like there's division among our communities. At that time, it was very important that those two communities came together because they had very, very unique, set of agendas and things that they wanted to really work towards. You had folks who were involved in the Brown Berets. You have folks who were involved in the Chicano movement. You have folks who were involved in the rights of migrant workers. And there was a conversion of ideologies, but that sort of found a common ground to say, these are the ills of our community. These are the needs of the community. And I think that's why it's so important that community came together to do the takeover versus, the small number of students we had at the time, because it was the agenda of the community, right? They were demanding GED classes in the community. They were demanding that they had a satellite office in the community, that the person who would lead the Spanish speaking outreach needed to have a direct line to the provost or the chancellor.
Right.
And that there were teachers hired. And so there was a number of demands that echo, the sentiments of the community. And I think that's why the community becomes, a centerpiece in this movement.
Yeah, and you and I talked a lot about the importance of the community remaining connected to the Roberto Hernandez Center even to this day. Eric, you were a student working there.
Yes.
Talk to us about the importance of the Roberto Hernandez Center as a legacy of this moment.
Thank you. And just one small piece that I would like to add to what Alberto was saying is that, I definitely think we should be acknowledging and celebrating the leaders of that movement, and remember that a lot of them are still involved today in what is going on, right? A lot of them, you will see them at marches or community events. And in particular, I remember when I worked at the Roberto Hernandez Center and I was helping with our scholarship program, Jesus Salas would always provide donations to that fund for the scholarship, right? So a lot of those same leaders from back in the day are still leading in a different capacity today. And I think that's awesome. And then to answer your question about today, the Roberto Hernandez Center is a really like beautiful place to me, to see like a concentration of Latino students, kind of all backgrounds in one space, congregating together, which is not a common thing in any school, in any like predominantly white institution like UWM or like many of our state public schools in this country. So to have your own kind of space where, you know, like you're not going to be judged, where people speak your language, where there's counselors, wonderful counselors like Gabriela Dorantes, who are culturally competent, who speak the language, who know how to talk to our parents and grandparents that also have special questions. It's really a gem at UWM, and Bolton Hall in general is full of these gems of programs that were fought for and that need to be fought for to be preserved. Another really interesting thing about this space is like when I was there, sometimes we would help organizations have meetings there, planning actions or planning events, you know, on campus or off campus. And just having that infrastructure of a space where you can meet and be connected in the community, it's so powerful. It can't be underestimated. A lot of times we take places like the RHC for granted. And when we take it for granted, we don't defend them, right? Because we don't appreciate what we have. Right. But I got my bachelor's in sociology at the University of Louisville, where I spent a lot of time growing up in Louisville, Kentucky. And we didn't have anything like that. There was very few like resources for Latino students. We did have a couple awesome counselors on campus. I was an organization of a group called Blackout of like LGBT people of color students. And that was something that was really important to me, but I never had a space like the RHC growing up. So it was really, to me, a privilege to have that opportunity to work there. And I always kind of saw myself as continuing the work that was laid down, you know, continuing to lay bricks on top of that foundation that was already there for us from the generations before.
Sure. Hey, Adam, show us a few more images. Command Central, Keisha's telling us we got to move forward and get us into the teaching conversation, but show us a few more images as we begin to think about teaching, because we didn't even get through all of them. There's some more there. Keisha, we promise we're moving to the next section.
So I just wanted to, I want to show a few more images here. Okay. I mean, one quick comment, we can thread this through the rest of our conversation, is that when you look at the images, there are a lot of, the point that it's very diverse. There's a lot of women that are present, and a lot of times, I just want to say this because it's actually, I feel timely in this current moment, is a lot of times male leadership tends to rise to they step to the mic a lot of times, and maybe don't think about who might not be at the mic as well. And in this conversation, I just want to point out the role of women within this is not, I think sometimes it can get diminished in the way that we remember. And I'm not saying specifically this story, but a lot of times those fade into the background.
And Adam, if I may, I feel compelled to enunciate some of those names of women, since I have some of my notes in front of me. You know, people like Marla Anderson, who was one of the 5 arrested during the takeover, you know, Clementina Castro, Enriqueta Gonzalez, Maria Ortega, Juanita Renteria, Delfina Guzman. I mean, the list goes on, and these are the names, as you mentioned, that often are not, you know, mentioned when we talk about this momentous occasion in our history in activism. And these are brave women who were mothers, grandmothers. I recall also that during those days of protests, even they held mass outside of Chapman Hall. They held mass. And, you know, the faith community was on board. You know, Reverend Jaime Davila, who was instrumental in and the Christian Center in the near South Side that later led to the Spot, that later led to the creation of the United Community Center. I mean, you had individuals who were intricately embedded into the community and knew firsthand what were the dire needs of our families and our students. So,
you know, a way in which the students kind of made that critique too, and during these protests, where we're just seeing a few images here of people breaking the systems in ways that I think are really clever. You know, obviously we saw some traditional forms of protest like marching there. These are women who are looking for Spanish-speaking texts in the library and not finding any. You know, there were folks that went to the finance department or went to different spaces where
registrar's office,
that were created to help students, and then kind of just pointing out these aren't working. And I think those forms of protest, in almost in some ways, a little bit as theater, right? To create this moment of here's what it looks like for our systems to break down, and making sure they were being documented. To your point, Eric, you're kind of writing history and creating it at the same time. So some of these, go ahead.
There's another really important component to this that we oftentimes don't talk about and certainly lose sight of, which is student protests, particularly in this moment, really help to redefine what the student rights are on campus. And it's Black and Latino students who are pushing universities to expand rights that would then extend to all students. And so we also have to think about the important components of how student voice then becomes a central part of campus culture because of the ways that these young folks are pushing against what is what is it, in loco parentis and all of that. They're redefining what those definitions mean. It's not only the folks out at Berkeley, it's also, you know, the folks here in Milwaukee and other Latino voices are part of that conversation.
I just want to really quick get through what some of the response was to the protests, which was police, which might not be surprising. This is actually a protester handing food to an officer, which I think is a really important gesture of kind of where they were. So they're certainly, you know, as is reflected today out in our streets, police are part of that coordinated response, and here are kind of the unwinding images. So we can go back to the PowerPoint now, Keisha. I'm officially done showing images.
So let's start talking about teaching this important history, this moment. For the folks who are on the call with us, the attendees, please start to jump in. All righty, because we need to make sure that we are thinking about the classroom and the curriculum components to this, the curricular components. As we think about teaching this, Eric and Alberto, what should teachers be including? What are some of the key topics? And we don't have to be very specific. We can drill down in a second, but give us some big umbrella themes that need to come out in the classroom.
Well, I think, you know, what needs to be considered is a collective and almost a series of events that were interconnected and that really highlighted at the time what the community needed, and so and how identifying the issues in the community, how engaging folks in the community can lead to change, right? And to positive change for the advancement of folks in higher education and in the K-12 arena as well, because, you know, what we have to understand is that bilingual education was also a contentious topic during that time. You know, housing, you know, the events at Allen Bradley, right? The March on Milwaukee. I mean, there's a conversion of different things, and so when we think about creating curriculum and creating these things, you know, it's good. It will be important for students to understand, you know, that rich history and how all those pieces lead to the Chapman takeover and to the things that were formalized after the takeover, right? It didn't ended with that takeover. It took months of negotiation. You know, CELA was very instrumental in equipping themselves with knowledge, equipping themselves with advisory from lawyers, understanding that the university had dollars allocated for these types of programs, but we're not acting on that, and so it's through, you know, good organization and looking into what others had done previously that they're able to craft, you know, a well thought out plan, and eventually, you know, acting on that plan, to really let the folks know on campus that they understood that the UWM was created as an urban institution to serve the community around it, and they were not living up to that mission that the university has. And so I think there's a number of elements, and so definitely enough enough content to develop a multi-semester, or, you know, a whole educational program to educate folks on activism during that period of time.
Yeah. Eric, what you got? You out there in the streets, you in your car right now. Talk to us.
Yeah. So yeah, I totally agree 100% with all the points Alberto is making. And then on top of that, I always like to emphasize how, like, history is a living, breathing thing, and how today is directly connected to yesterday. So I feel like any sort of programming that's discussing the Chapman Hall takeover should always be connected right back to what is going on today and our more recent past. And for example, here in the south side of Milwaukee, everyone knows about Voces de la Frontera and, you know, their youth organization. Yes, Youth Empowered in the Struggle. And, you know, there was a UWM chapter for Youth Empowered in the Struggle that split off and became independent at one point because they were having conflicts with the leadership at Voces. And that organization, the dear friends of mine, they're called the Young People's Resistance Committee, YPRC, no longer around, but they did a lot of organizing on campus while I was there, and a lot of organizing in the community, especially when we saw the beginning of the detention centers, not the beginning, but an escalation of these detention centers, what we would call, you know, prison camps of undocumented children. So I feel like we should tie it back to the movement in the streets today, always, and make sure that that's being acknowledged, and, you know, the influence of these actions, right? The reverberations of how something that happened so long ago can create these reverberations that are still felt in the street today. And it's very easy to see these photos on a wall and feel alienated and distant from it, but it's always so much closer than we think.
You know, I have one question that I think really is at the heart of what drives us to create these kinds of digital modules for our young people, and this is about identity development. Can you gentlemen talk just a little bit about the importance of sharing these kinds of rich cultural histories and the ways in which these histories positively impact the identity development of our young people? Why are these histories so important?
For a number of reasons. You know, the vast majority, or, you know, a big chunk of the Latino population, and other groups as well, you know, it's immigrants, and oftentimes when you know, and when you look at the history of Latinos in Milwaukee since 1920, you know, growing probably the most in 1950, you know, 1970. I think the natural thing for communities of immigrants is to come together and to see the needs and trying to fill those needs. And so I think that's part of that development of a community, not just as an individual, but Me personally, I'm a product of the center. You know, I benefited for 6+ years of the Spanish speaking outreach in the early 90s. And it was through my interactions with the center that I credit my formation as an individual, right? Not only they provided, you know, firsthand services, but they connected me to other networks that were crucial to my development as a student, as an individual, as someone who perhaps was trying to find its way in a community, right? Did not know who to go to, did not know who to talk to, did not know where resources lived. And so I think when we talk about young people today, understanding this history and understanding what it stood for and what it stands for today, it could do the same thing, right? It could really, aspirationally speaking, give a student the motivation and the aspiration to say, you know what, I'm going to go to college because this was done for me. This was laid out for me. And this was the effort that took place to lay out this for me. So that's how I sort of internalize my experience going through the SSOI as a young immigrant coming from Puerto Rico to Milwaukee, understanding the value of my elders, understanding the value of people who put their name and their bodies on the line to provide a platform for me to thrive. And so I think those pieces are key when we think about mentors, when we talk about, you know, the formation of a community and an individual.
Thanks. Eric, you want to jump in? What are some of your thoughts about the importance of these sort of culturally specific kinds of curricula?
I think it's extremely important because we deal with such a twisted narrative around our communities. And, you know, there's all this talk of, you know, we're stealing jobs, we're criminals. And, you know, the reality is that we're just members of the community, family members, just like anybody else. And it's also important that even though we are immigrants and a lot of people do have a lot to lose by stepping out and taking action and raising their voice. You know, there's a lot of context of repression in our home countries, of very violent state repression for any sort of action like this, right? But I think it's important to teach about this content, put out these images and sounds and vibes, just so people know that, you know, que no tenemos miedo. We're not afraid. There is fear, but the courage is way stronger than the fear. And if you see these type of images and feel the emotion behind it, then that inspires people to action today. And you know, there's a lot of people in Milwaukee that put a lot on the line, just like you were saying, by stepping in the street, raising their voices today. There's a lot of state repression still, a lot of repression from non-state actors, white supremacists out there targeting activists till this day. So I think it is important to put it out there, inspire young people to keep that energy going, keep the ball rolling, and always take it to a higher level. And one last piece as well, I do want to mention, I forgot to kind of touch on this, but you know, when we talk about Black and Brown solidarity, a lot of times it's almost seemed like the Latino community is one thing and the Black community is a whole nother thing, when in reality, we need to acknowledge that our Afro-Latina and Afro-Latino brothers and sisters that were in the movement since day one, you know, both on the Puerto Rican side and the Mexican side, and from all other nationalities of the diaspora, and acknowledge that, you know, the story is more complex than it has been told, right? And that, that our Afro-Latina brothers and sisters have been there from the jump, from day one, and they are still in the streets today. And it's not, you know, it's not as easy as how a lot of people like to frame it, as these two completely separate communities at odds with each other.
You know, Eric, I have to share this with you. When I'm teaching about slavery, if I'm teaching about sort of that colonial moment, one of the things I often say to my classes is that I did not have a better understanding of the Black American experience until I became far more knowledgeable about the Black presence in Central and South America, the African presence in Central and South America and the Caribbean. that provided me a broader global understanding of words like African descendant, Latino, Hispanic, like the as you stated very clearly, the ways in which that our histories intersect are critical. And if we don't get our kids to start to understand that, and adults too, we're missing out on some of the most vibrant histories and some of the vibrant sort of culturally identifying components to a global history than we could ever imagine. It is critical that we get our studies to that global awareness. Intersectionality, absolutely, David.
So I want to just respond to some of the stuff David's been putting down there and just in general. So we're in the general Q&A part now. I had a chance last year to bring students from Carmen Northwest Campus and Carmen Southeast Campus together. And we spent time with both Jesus Salas and Fred Reed on that tour. So, and we talked about the history of Latinx activism in Milwaukee and the open housing marches to the same students who were both Black and brown within this context. And like, I could see really, I'll just say this first, how much we've let them down, in that the students were like hearing from Jesus Salas and they were like, I can't believe you exist. And like Fred Reed, they're like, I had no idea that there were legends from the city. You're here with us right now in this room. And it's so disorienting for them, right? Because like when they think of someone who's a freedom fighter, it's always someone far away. It's never from this city. So I think like that's one piece. But then, you know, I knew those kids felt really charged up in that moment. But my question then was, do they have anywhere to go with it? Is this going to be a discrete experience? It's, you know, it's not going to, you know, maybe one of them had a revelation, but then the question is that a discrete experience within their education, or are there other things to undergird and support that, where they're not just, you know, having one good experience, learning, you know, if they do one of these modules feeling like, oh, that was cool, but then is it being continued through the rest of their education, right? Is it just kind of an island that gets lost in the ocean of the rest of the core curricula? So,
yeah. Hey, attendees, I'm going to open up your mics. We've got about another 7 minutes or so before we got to let these folks go and wrap up our conversation. So I'm going to start allowing folks to talk, and feel free to jump in with any questions that you might have, any thoughts that might be interesting. Continue to also share comments in the Q&A and the chat feature. So if you all have any thoughts, comments, most of you are, I'll fix that. Okay.
So I heard there's a comment here from Michelle Hilbert on Facebook, students talking about Black Lives Matter demand to have more Black and ethnic studies. Have the students said they'd never had a Black or brown teacher. Couldn't even name Black and brown teachers at our school. Dr. Latish Reed shared this with me once at Milwaukee Public Schools, that there's about, the student population's about 80% students of color. The teachers are about 80% white. And then the administrators are actually about 80% people of color. So there's kind of this weird, I mean, the word that's used here, the operative one, is weird.
I would argue that those numbers one more time, Adam.
80% students of color, 80% white teachers, 80% administrators of color at MPS. And that, I mean, that's basically like institutional racism. That's another name you could give to it. But yeah, that plays a huge role in it. I've heard, her quick reasoning was that when the schools desegregated, there was redundancy and teachers of color got laid off. So, I mean, that's a simplification, I'm sure, in a lot of ways. But
David, I just promoted you to a panelist. Yeah. Man, jump on in.
I was trying to get David to respond to stuff, I think. I was like, let's get into David's home court and see what he has to say.
Well, I was going to say, I just commented that there's a push for educators of color to go into those admin roles. And I was recently having a conversation with someone about how much of that is rooted in whiteness and white supremacy culture. And I know that may sound crazy to people that are listening to me, but the reason why that point was made is what the person I was talking to was that people of color in leadership positions, especially with young people, tend to get treated as the whisperers, right? So when you have a white teacher that doesn't know how to connect to their students, you call upon this leader of color who's going to come in and basically like, you know, instill discipline or get students to engage. And I think, you know, in that conversation, we came to this realization that like we need to really cultivate teachers of color staying as teachers before they even move on to these leadership positions.
Thanks. And I'm promoting folks to panelists. So if anything weird happens, I apologize. I just want to make sure everybody has the full opportunity to share thoughts. So feel free to unmute. We got a few more minutes. If you have any comments, jump on in, folks. This is
I think you know, when we talk about the development of teachers in our own communities, we have some really heavy lifting to do. I think we need to reintroduce that concept, and I think, you know, there's so many pushes to, you know, take students into STEM, into other areas, and really, you know, we lost a little bit of that energy to reintroduce students to the field of education under a different lens, and you know, with equip them with other information. I think we ought to, you know, push for programs that would allow for students to be introduced to that field, to the School of Education and all respective institutions, and really model and let them know of the need for them in the system, right? And I think, you know, a lot of it too has to do with their own individual experiences. If they did not see someone that looked like them in the classroom throughout their K through 12 experience, why would I go into a field?
Yeah.
Right. So it's gonna, like I said, it's gonna take a lot of heavy lifting and, you know, strategy, which I'm more than willing to join anyone that's on this call and beyond to think about ways that we can bring that message to students and begin to develop little by little the culture that it's needed for students to consider the education field.
You know what? Actually, let me try this. Eric, you might be sitting, you can weigh in on this, but you might be sitting next to someone who has something to say on this. I know your wife, your partner, is a teacher at South Division who grew up in the same neighborhood where she teaches now. Kika, do you want to say something? You want to
Kika is with me right now, and I don't know, I can't see the shot or whatever.
Hey, Kika.
But she is with me here, getting ready for the Corona test. She hasn't been involved in the conversation because I have my headphones in, so to use the microphone, so she didn't get a chance to hear the conversation. But I will say that Kika is an individual who has been involved in this kind of work since she was very young, and that work is how I ended up in Milwaukee. And she is a truly inspirational person in her work in education as an MPS teacher for ESL. And Kika, do you want to say something about the importance of having Black and brown educators as teachers for the students and the impact that it can make on the lives of the students? Big question.
Sorry, Kika.
Well, I'll speak about my experience.
I absolutely love what's happening right now. This is great.
I guess I'm here.
Great for us. Sorry, Kika.
Welcome. Talk to us.
So I, not to like put my school out there either, but I work at a high school with mostly a Black and brown student population. And I am an ESL teacher, and I take that role very importantly, not just as like, oh, students should learn English, but like using language as a tool for your own advancement, and not just because you're, you know, we're in America, speak English. And I am the only ESL teacher of color at my school of the 5 ESL teachers that we have. And I feel like my students find it difficult to connect with other ESL teachers many times because of that. Not to say that they aren't doing good work in many ways and that they aren't working to be culturally competent, but just the lived experience. Like even when my students ask me, "Oh, where do you live?" and I'm like, "Oh, I live on Pierce, like off the National." And they're like, "Oh, for real? Like you don't live on the east side or wherever?" And I'm like, "No." Or where did you go to school? I went to MPS. And so just having that rooted connection.
I think we lost them.
Well, I think, yeah, we lost, but I think we got the point though. So thank you, both of you, for sharing, and thank you for jumping on just out of the blue. All right, we're going to wrap up, folks. We are going to continue.
Being able to make sure.
Oh, she's back. Yes. Start over like the last 20 seconds or so.
Oh, I'm sorry. Because of those experiences, I feel like having teachers of color that are representative of the student body is important for relationship building and building connections with our students.
Oh, we gotta stay on for this. Are we getting ready to watch a corona test? Leave us on the corona test, please. Folks, this is history for real right here. Okay.
Sorry, Kika.
Is it possible for me to see the screen so I know what my shot looks like?
Yeah, it looks good.
Dr. Smith, before we disconnect here, I want to make a point that there's a program on campus, Latino Studies program and Latino Study 101, that takes a deep dive into the history of Latinos, both in Milwaukee and also the history of the center and the takeover. So,
hey, Alberto, can you drop that in the chat for us?
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So over the course of the month, folks, we're going to be doing every Wednesday, as you know, we're going to be talking about Latino history in Milwaukee. Next week, we're going to center the voices of Latinx women. And so we're going to have some pretty awesome women joining us next Wednesday. Give our panelists a round of applause virtually, whatever that looks like and sounds like.